Welcome to the 146th episode of the Supernatural Occurrence Studies podcast.
So damn paranormal.
My name is Jason Knight, host of the show, and with me, as always, is
your very own Oscar Spector,
producer extraordinaire and podcast co-host. Listeners, if you'd like to skip our intro, please go to the show notes. There'll be a timestamp there waiting for you to get you right to the topic. Oscar, we kind of talked offline. There hasn't been much going on in our lives these past 2 weeks. Anything you want to mention?
No. I've just been working on this show, and I've been twitching on our Twitch channel, and that's all I've been doing, really. And nice. People can already see those. If you're interested, I've been replaying. Actually, I started my second run of The Last of Us Part 2, if you want to check that out, which isn't a horror game, but it's almost a horror game, you know. Yeah, so I've been doing that, and otherwise that's it. I have no life. I've had no life in the last 2 weeks since because of the show, because of the series thing. I've just been writing, and I haven't done anything else.
We mentioned it in the last episode that this now 3-part series will likely crest 100 pages.
Right. I wasn't sure at the time, but now I am.
It's over 100-page script you put together for this 3-parter.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Wow. Great job, man. And this one, the Octopus Tendrils, this is the one I've been waiting for.
I know. I teased you off air about it a lot.
Yes, you did. Mm-hmm. You did. So great job on that. We'll keep the intro short so you get right to the topic. For me, kind of the same, man. Nothing. Just work. Incredibly tiring. I got a new fridge, adulting. That was exciting for us.
Does it talk to you?
No, but it is Wi-Fi. Know who. I can't say her name because she's sitting right next to me and she'll go off. But it's who enabled. Alexa. Can we do that? If she went off when I spelled, that would have been really creepy.
Yeah, that would have been extra creepy. She would be like, what if she spoke to you by spelling out to you responses? HELLL.
And I'm out. Out in the backyard she goes. So yeah, we got a new fridge, and I mentioned this on the last episode. The Jason Voorhees I'm building from part 4 is coming along great. So far, I've got 10 videos for my video journal for Patreon of Jason's build. I'm really happy with the way it's coming out. So my free time weekends, I've been working on that. So that's pretty exciting. But other than that, I got nothing else.
No, I understand.
What do you say we get into the contact information?
Yes,
this definitely is going to be record-setting intro for us, just so you know.
Yes, it is. And I'm fine with it because I have nothing right now. Nothing to say. Yeah.
The easiest way to contact the Supernatural Occurrence Studies podcast is by visiting our website, chicagoghostpodcast.com. From chicagoghostpodcast.com, you can get to all of our social sites, including Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, and of course, Patreon. And I do want to give a shout out right here to 2 new patrons we picked up, Madison Kidd and David Thompson. Guys, thank you very much for the support. We love you. And if you're not a patron, for just $5 a month, you get access to a library of exclusive audio and video content. That's content that will not be played here on this public podcast feed. It's just for our patrons to say thank you. That's go to patreon.com/Supernatural Occurrence Studies podcast, or just click the Patreon link in this episode show notes. It'll get you right to us. Another way you contact the podcast is by calling our phone number. That's Chicago area code 872-529-0767, 872-529-0767. Leave us a message, send us a text. We'll read them and play them on the show.
I'm not even going to fight you on it today.
I know. Wow. This is amazing. So yes, this is a part.
Saving my voice.
You're going to need it. And I'll just say it now. This is a part 3. If you're just joining in now, make sure and go back and listen to episode 144 and 145 to get caught up on the Octopus. And I think with that, we could take a break.
Yeah, let's do it.
Listeners, welcome back to the show. Well, the lights are turned down low, the ceremonial candle is lit, and the drinks are flowing. Let's start this show. So I think it bears repeating that this is a part 3. If you're not caught up, if you're just joining us, make sure and go back and listen to episodes 144 and 145, because Oscar Spector really lays the groundwork for this Octopus conspiracy. And in this episode, we're going to see just how far-reaching these octopus tendrils really are. And I've been dying to hear this final episode. So, Oscar, could you please take us on this next journey, this final journey?
Yes. And normally I, have this whole, musings of an intro, of an opening that gets you going, gets maybe the juices flowing, maybe ask some questions that along the way I will have answered, right, in the body of the show. I didn't give myself a chance to really write an opening, so I'm just going to jump in on it. But, luckily is that it's a part 3, and the easiest thing for me to do in this case is jump in with a recap. So, previously on the Supernatural Current Studies podcast, we expand the world beyond the deaths of Danny Casolaro and Fred Alvarez by talking about some of the men and companies in power that have led to disaster on a bigger scale and across the world, beginning in the U.S. The first hurdle was the Wackenhut Corporation, a prestigious security firm and offices in several dozens of countries, especially the U.S. Wackenhut was very right-wing and anti-communism, either as a result of the political nature of their 60s and 70s, or pushing agendas towards their own means, or both. And they did their part to ward off any communist threat. They did this by sidestepping congressional investigations in the form of a partnership with Cabazon Band of Mission Indians and sending arms manufactured on reservation land to countries like Nicaragua to help the Contras or the Middle East against other communist footholds. Old intelligence spook and Cabazon financial advisor John Philip Nichols managed this partnership through connections that led to people like Earl W. Bryan and Michael Riconosciuto to work for their means. Besides anti-communist rhetoric, it's clear that money was valued as much as power in any form it takes. Next is the Inslaw affair. William Hamilton started and owned Inslaw, an information technology company based in Washington, D.C., designed to get contracts for utilitarian software for the U.S. government. A great and useful software that they developed was called Promise in the 1970s. This program served to itemize, organize, and filter large volumes of data to easily track and input new information, perfect for attorney offices and police stations. Inslaw went bankrupt, though, after their contract with the Department of Justice led to broken promises and backroom scheming. The DOJ used their influence to refuse paying Inslaw millions of dollars for Promise while demanding the rights to own the property. Congressional and Senate investigations said they tricked and stole from Inslaw, despite the fact that no one was brought to justice and Inslaw went bankrupt. What's worse is that the DOJ and Attorney General Edwin Meese paid off a competitor of Inslaw, Earl W. Bryan, with copies of the Promise software. Earl Bryan then gave it to Israel, Canada, and other countries after contracting a CIA/Wackenhut lackey working at Cabazon Arms, Michael Riconosciuto, to install a backdoor and other changes in order to spy on foreign governments. This was both for information on enemies or potential enemies, but also to the highest bidder, though unproven. William Hamilton fought the good fight in many ways, including befriending and being Danny Casolaro's primary source for his research into Octopus, and still fights to this day. Lastly, we delve deeper into Michael Riconosciuto's background. He was Casolaro's second primary source of information, providing key players and background to scandals that made front-page news throughout the years and in several countries. Besides Wackenhut and Inslaw, Riconosciuto had a slew of wild allegations that were hard to believe, but contained real possibilities. This includes conspiracy theories like the October surprise, which implicates Earl Bryan, as well as the Nugan Handbank scandal in Australia. A gifted man of science, Riconosciuto at first proved to be a witness with real heft in the eyes of congressional investigations until his arrest in 1991. His sworn statement that involved everything in this recap and much more was damaged in credibility when his alleged involvement in manufacturing and selling drugs led to a prison sentence 8 days after testifying. After Castellero's death in August 1991, Riconosciuto kept in contact with his allies, journalists, and family. Further allegations and knowledge bombs are due to arrive in this final chapter, The Octopus Tendrils. Okay, and for that, the show actually will start. And we're going to start with a series of events and big companies, too big to fail. Some of them do fail, but it's going to be a lot of fun. Hopefully, go along with it. There will be little breaks for discussion if there's any. And we're going to start with something called the BCCI scandal. This is kind of a big one. This segment may seem to require some knowledge in finance or history of finance, but I personally don't think so. Similar to how I treated the Inslaw segment in the last show, you don't need to know the intricacies of computer. Therefore, you don't need to know how the world of banking works to understand this part. It definitely couldn't hurt, though, of course. BCCI stands for the Bank of Credit and Commerce International. It was founded by a Pakistani financier in 1972 named Aga Hassan Abedi. The BCCI was registered in Luxembourg with primary offices in Karachi and London and managed to achieve over 400 branches in 78 countries only a decade later. Wow. This bank had assets in excess of 20 billion US dollars, making it the seventh largest private bank in the world. BCCI was created with capital of which 25% was from the Bank of America and the remaining 75% from Sheikh Zayed bin Sultan Al Nahyan, the ruler of Abu Dhabi in the United Arab Emirates. The company divided itself into BCCI SA in Luxembourg and BCCI Overseas in Grand Cayman. They did this because it allowed several transactions like buying the BCO, for example, Banque de Commerce et Placements. That's French, by the way. I can't do French. They also created KIFCO, the Kuwait International Finance Company, and a series of other companies through ICIC, which is the International Credit and Investment Company. And they did all this through BCCI. And all of this was done by 76, by the way. So these are big purchases, is what I'm saying. There were pieces in newspapers saying that this type of rapid expansion was done through cash deposits when most companies of this magnitude use the money to make investments. From here, it was alleged that, quote, the bank's transformation was guided by the head of Saudi intelligence with a view to enabling it to finance covert American operations at a time in the aftermath of Watergate, when the American intelligence agencies were defending themselves from investigation by domestic authorities, unquote. Which kind of reminds me of the enhanced interrogation we did under Bush Jr., and became controversial and then was frowned upon later under Obama, if you remember this time. It's a time to backpedal, check your surroundings, and cover your ass. But already the cracks of conspiracy are showing. BCCI also entered the African financial markets in 1979 and Asia in the 80s. One of the first foreign banks awarded a license to operate in China, actually. To give an example of Aga Hassan Abedi's networking skills, JP Morgan and Citicorp wish they had those licenses.
Wow.
Yeah. Let's get into how they worked, not just their accomplishments. The 200 plus managers and general managers reported directly to Abedi and CEO Swaleh Nakvi. The company was structured in such a way that no single country had overall regulatory supervision over it, so as not to hinder potential growth and expansions from blossoming. It was also not regulated by a country that had a central bank. Finally, it should be mentioned, as part of background, of course, that the reason Luxembourg and Grand Cayman are desirable locations to start a bank is because they have, shall we say, weak banking regulations. Notoriously so, in fact. American cinema constantly references bigwig bad guys boasting their offshore accounts created from illegal activities. Because of such things, a bureau within the U.S. Department of Treasury warned the Federal Reserve on several occasions that in no uncertain terms should BCCI be allowed to buy any American bank because it was poorly regulated. I believe sus is the correct term here.
A little sus, yes.
A little sus, a little bit. By the way, I really love that sentence. Big wig, bad guys boasting. It's just like a lot of B's in there. Good alliteration. Anyway, there were other dealings and maneuvers that produced worry in Western minds. Through many loans and using BCCI stock as collateral, they made $1.48 billion, which found its way to secretly owning First American Bank. Here's how they did it. Quote, one of the pieces of the schemes was Washington-based First American Bankshares, Inc. For a fee, prominent Middle Eastern individuals served as fronts for BCCI in gaining control of the Washington Bank in 1981. These illegally held shares in First American were then used as collateral a second time by BCCI to raise about $600 million in new loans, said a source investigating the affair for British authorities. BCCI used that money to cover up losses elsewhere, he said, unquote. That's a big fucking deal. This was discovered through audits when BCCI's numbers acted suspiciously. There were strange lending practices too, which led the United Kingdom to set a cap on their number of branch networks allowed in their country. Lending law violations galore here. Beyond all of this I said so far, there's an incredible amount of money laundering, causing corruption, peddling, and bribery that was done through BCCI. This is why they're on my radar first on this part 3. I considered buying the book, The BCCI Affair, a report to the Committee on Foreign Relations by Hank Brown, but I figured there's an insane amount of coverage already and articles and such that I'll think I'll be fine. But what do you think so far?
These...
Have you heard of them?
I haven't heard of BCCI, but these wizard-like accounting practices are just... Mm-hmm. It's unbelievable.
Unbelievable
that someone could come up with this sort of thing.
Yeah, no, it is. All that is just what's been 100% proven so far. Everything I said exactly happened that way.
Wow.
Obviously, they backtracked that, and now that their BCCI is gone, which I kind of alluded to earlier, obviously they don't no longer own Bank of America, whatever. But they pulled it off for a while there.
Yeah, that too. Anyway, just amazing. I never knew that.
That's some weird. That's like a scheme that works maybe to get like a few bucks of someone, but they did it on such a large scale, right? Anyway, it's funny. Here's how I saw BCCI. If a regular bank with all of its bullshit is like Facebook, then BCCI was 4chan. Unregulated, right? Unregulated, borderline to actually illegal, and finally dismantled. You know how casinos, especially in Las Vegas, are built as labyrinths to keep you from leaving and distract you with pretty lights, legs, and alcohol?
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. It was similar with BCCI when auditors came calling. The Byzantine internal workings confused everyone, including BCCI employees themselves, making it all the more difficult to keep track of their scheming. I'm to the point where I don't even have to ask you where this is going and how it all might fit, right? Here's a few more examples, though, to underline BCCI's darker side. The most active countries were Brazil, Argentina, Colombia, Uruguay, Paraguay, Peru, and Venezuela. Beyond the fact that Venezuela was name dropped a couple times in this trilogy, you know that the reason for this is fucking drugs. Quote, according to one BCCI source, by far the largest operation was in Colombia, where BCCI ran essentially a full-service bank with branches in the centers of drug production. The bank developed a reputation for asking no questions, dealing in large amounts of cash, and generating a lot of wire transfers of the kind that can be used to launder money, sources said, unquote. Yeah.
Wow.
In 1988, BCCI did business with an undercover agent in Florida who was posing as a drug operative, looking to launder millions of dollars. This is like a little example. I read that article, by the way. It seems like the guy stole the money from drug dealers, and instead of handing it off to the federal, he tried to like launder it through BCCI.
That's a Hollywood script right there.
That's a Hollywood script, yeah, essentially. Another example, quote, BCCI had a wide network in the Middle East and Africa and was especially dominant in Pakistan. It was the favored bank under the regime of former Pakistani President Zia. For instance, the deceased U.S. ally whose government was assisting the CIA's funding in the Afghan rebels. I bet he could just walk in and out of Zia's office, said a former customer. They knew how to get to the top in third world countries, unquote. BCCI's clients were people like Manuel Noriega, Ferdinand Marcos, and Saddam Hussein. all big deals. Obviously, Saddam Hussein is more famous for us, but all big deals. Yeah. Here's a juicy name, though, that maybe you don't know, Jay. It was alerted to Bank of England officials that Abu Nidal was using an account at a BCCI branch in London. Abu Nidal, which is his nom de guerre, was the founder of Fatah, the Revolutionary Council, a Palestinian splintered group thought to be the most ruthless in the 70s and 80s. People into modern history and politics may know of him already. He's believed to have ordered attacks in over 20 countries, killing more than 300 people. His most famous attacks were of Rome and Vienna's airports in 1985. A revolutionary to some and a terrorist to others, Abu Nidal was killed in Baghdad in 2002, supposedly on orders by Saddam Hussein. Nidal wasn't just in it for a cause, though. He was often contracted as well, but I did not read too much into his actions, although he is an interesting one for me for several reasons for this show. Terrorism, or whatever men like Abu Nidal happen to be, it's something we almost could cover on the show, but not quite, not quite serial killer and not quite enough for conspiracy. It's almost too historical and political to discuss in depth, on the fringes of a subject of ours. But what do you think so far?
I don't know yet. I mean, I could just see these Manuel Noriega or Saddam Hussein walking up to a teller in one of these banks. Could I cash in this 50 for some?
I'm pretty sure they sent someone. They sent someone.
It's amazing that this bank had them as clients. Yeah, not shady at all.
No, not at all. No, forget them. That being said, I want to go over a few things that hit closer to our show. This shouldn't be a surprise, but the motherfucking CIA used BCCI for their covert operations, particularly in the Middle East and South America. What those accounts were allegedly used for was to aid foreign governments, launder money to purchase arms, and controlling, at least in a financial way, the drug interests funneling in and out of the United States. Mm-hmm. I say allegedly because there is no evidence, though it is quite fucking obvious. A former commissioner of customs told the people investigating BCCI about the CIA's several accounts. A 1991 article stated that the National Security Council also had accounts at BCCI, which had been used in a slew of covert operations, including transferring money and weapons during the Iran-Contra affair. I will explain more about that in a bit. After the audits came the myriad of investigations from all fronts. There was a massive regulatory battle in 1991, and in early July of that year, customs and bank regulators in 7 countries raided and locked down records of its branch offices. Yeah. Quote, investigators in the United States and the UK determined that BCCI had been set up deliberately to avoid centralized regulatory review and operated extensively in bank secrecy jurisdictions. Its affairs were extraordinarily complex. Its officers were sophisticated international bankers whose apparent objective was to keep their affairs secret, to commit fraud on a massive scale, and to avoid detection, unquote. With a lifespan between 1972 to 1991, mere weeks before Danny Casolaro was found dead, the BCCI gets liquidated and forced closure. I want to say that too much of this is fucking true. And I have skipped many, many other problems and key people connected with that piece of recent history that either used or were used by the BCCI, in a direct or indirect manner. I went with the Bank of Credit and Commerce International first because establishing what it was at the top of the show will help when they come up again later on. Beyond this, that old saying, follow the money, kept coming into my thoughts when researching this 3-part series. Financial gain, especially if it's tax-free, is the greatest motivator for the conspiracies happening here. It's not the only one, but the one that brings all the suspects together. Danny Casolaro had found connections between the Octopus and BCCI, and I'd argue that after Inslaw, it was probably the main focus for him. I'm not done with BCCI, but we will move on. So that's the end of the BCCI part. What do you think?
Okay. So Casolaro was starting to investigate them.
Oh yeah, he had been. Yeah.
And then he wound up being suicided.
Yeah, just weeks apart from the actual downfall of the company. All weeks. Yeah, you're going to see a lot of the same like years popping up, 91, 81. All those are going to pop up a lot here. And like, oh, it's a little too coincidental. Yeah.
Okay.
You're going to see more of that. Now we're on to our next bit here. This next segment is called the Reagan administration.
Uh-oh.
Okay. Yeah, I know. Sorry, guys. This segment is not as political as you may think. I will not be going over the infamously bad slogan of just say no. I will. You remember that, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I will not go over Reagan's policies. I'm going to focus on two events, one in the beginning of his first presidential term and the other in the middle of his second. We will begin with the October surprise. No mystery. I'll just say what it is. This is a conspiracy theory directly involving then California Governor, said that weird, Ronald Reagan, and others in a plot to use the release of 52 American hostages in Iran in order to win the 1980 election for presidency. Now, that sentence sounds too simple, so let's figure it out. What prompted the 52 Americans to be kidnapped? A group of militarized college students belonging to the Muslim student followers of the Imam's line, who supported the Iranian Revolution, took control of the U.S. Embassy in Tehran. This happened on November 4th, 1979, and they were held for 444 days until January 4th, 1981. At the time, then President Jimmy Carter called this atrocity an act of blackmail and the hostages as victims of terrorism and anarchy. Iran saw this as an act against the U.S. for influencing Iran, perceived or not, through the Shah of Iran, named Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. The U.S. did give long-standing support to the Shah, and what caused the Iranian Revolution led to Pahlavi's overthrow in 79. You see, when he was overthrown by the people of Iran, Pahlavi was admitted to the U.S. for cancer treatments, which in turn led to those college students to take action against American citizens in Tehran. They took American diplomats in exchange for the Shah, who was supposed to stand trial for the crimes against the people of Iran. That's what they did. In response, the U.S. rejected Iran's demands. That's funny. In response, the U.S. rejected Iran's demands to release the Shah to them, and Iran saw the Americans as complicit in the atrocities that they suffered. Let's finish talking about the crisis in the official capacity. The Iranians were in violation of international law, specifically the Vienna Convention, which grants immunity to diplomats on foreign soil. We all know that. The crisis reached a climax after diplomatic negotiations failed to win the release of the hostages. This led President Carter to send the U.S. military to try and rescue them with something called Operation Eagle Claw, using the USS Nimitz and USS Coral Sea. On April 24th, 1980, the attempt failed and resulted in one Iranian casualty and the accidental deaths of 8 Americans. In September 1980, the Iraq-Iran war began when Iraq invaded Iran. This led to negotiations with the Iranian government concerning the hostages and used Algeria as a go-between. It was too late for Carter, however, when he lost the election in a landslide, and the Algiers Accords weren't signed until literally minutes after Reagan's inaugural address to the nation was over. The crisis strengthened Ayatollah Khomeini's power and weakened relations between the two countries. I'll explain who Khomeini was in a second. Even all of this so far is just a simplified version of the intricacies between the two regions and the people. One could easily go as far back as 1953 when the CIA entered Iran through Operation Ajax, which defended British oil interests and involved the prime minister at the time. The famously known political schemer Henry Kissinger, that fucking asshole, was involved in Iraq and Iran beginning in the 1960s, and so on and so on and so on. Danny Casolaro, the man who has quickly become the source for all these connections to the Octopus in this series, heavily researched this nefarious group's dealings overseas throughout administrations like Nixon and Reagan. Casolaro and several others believe that individuals high in the Reagan administration arranged for those 52 American hostages to be held in Iran and detained until after the election. This comes from an excerpt in Casolaro's never published book. Quote, while rumors of the hostage release delay circulated for years after the election of Ronald Reagan, it wasn't until 1988 that testimony was offered by two covert operatives in two different courts regarding their knowledge and participation of a hostage release stall managed by then Reagan campaign chief William Casey. But now, two more covert operatives have emerged from that desert reservation in the journey of this story effort to confirm that previous testimony and provide richer details regarding the laundered payment by the Saudis and other particularities in order to prevent what Casey feared the most, a surprise release of the hostages before the election, almost guaranteeing windfall votes for President Jimmy Carter. The alleged reward to another Reagan insider for that mission to Iran in the summer of 1980 has been almost wholly responsible for the leaks leading to this odyssey. For it was in that reward in the form of a multi-million-dollar government contract, that technologies were found to have been stolen by the government from another company. In that other company's recovery from bankruptcy, its CEO has been the real-life star and gumshoe in this drama that continues to unfold each day. Casolaro also wrote, since Reagan was not a favorite son of the Octopus, why did it work so hard to ensure his selection in 1980? Even if the participation by campaign officials in holding the hostages until the election was limited to just the acquiescence of smiling gentlemen who knew better, why was the veil removed when it could have been so absolutely secret? Unquote. The two covert operatives Casolaro is talking about is Michael Riconosciuto and Ari Ben-Menashe, who were mentioned, Riconosciuto especially, many times in the last show.
Yeah.
The technologies and theft from a company is referring to Inslaw, again, as a spotlight in the last episode.
Oh, I see.
That's what he's talking about it. You see connections? The multi-million-dollar laundering that occurred was through BCCI, at least some of it. That payment was to another man we talked about on the last show also, called Earl Bryan, who received a certain software as his reward.
I wonder what that was.
Yeah. My thinking on Reagan's involvement is that it is passive at best. Reagan winning the election provided a way or an easier way to manipulate events and people to suit the Octopus, particularly having a slightly younger Bush senior in the administration. Having a Republican instead of a Democrat was useful to them. Lists like Casolaro began with statements made by former president of Iran, Abu Hassan Bani Sadr. I'm mispronouncing that for sure, by the way. He was the first president of Iran after the Iranian Revolution of 1979, that is. He abolished the monarchy and was impeached in 1981. The Iranian political and religious leader and founder of the Islamic Republic of Iran, who led the Iranian Revolution of 79, was Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. A famous figure worldwide, Khomeini was close friends with Bani Sadr's father and was supreme leader when he helped them become prime minister. Anyway, Bani Sadr claimed that the allegations about the October surprise were true, something he said he figured out after the fact, but still. A source we've talked about in the last episode that backed up this claim was Ari Ben-Menashe, who was an Israeli intelligence officer that was prominent on the Inslaw case. Here's something else. Quote, this one's potentially fucked up. It won't sound that way, but it will be later. Quote, there is a 21-hour gap in George Bush's schedule, corresponding to the time he is supposed to have been in Paris negotiating the hostage detainment, and conflicting stories from Bush and his staff about what he was doing when the alleged negotiations with the Iranians took place. In an affidavit, attorney Paul D. Wiltshire sent to Attorney General Janet Reno, he too detailed the existence of a shadow government paralleling in precise terms the Casolaro Octopus and their participation in the October surprise. Quote within the quote, the October surprise treason refers to the top secret trip then vice presidential candidate and former CIA director George Bush along with a plane full of some 25 to 30 other top CIA covert operatives, including a handful of prominent Republican and Democratic senators and congressmen, took to Paris on the weekend of October 18th and 19th, 1980. While in Paris, Bush secretly met with representatives of Ayatollah Khomeini, paid them bribes in the amount of $40 million, and promised to deliver to the man additional $5 billion in arms. The shipments of these arms began flowing even before the election, in exchange for the Iranians' agreement not to release the 52 American hostages they held in Tehran until after the November 4th, 1980 U.S. presidential elections, in order to guarantee the humiliation and defeat of President Jimmy Carter in that election, and in order to cement the CIA's lock on the White House for the next 12 years under George Bush, unquote.
What? What?
What's the what?
That's insane.
Yeah, it is insane. It is.
Do you believe this?
Yeah, a little bit.
Wow.
There's actually more stuff later on that kind of details back to that 21-hour gap.
Okay.
But yeah, overall, yeah, they talk a lot about that weekend. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm not gonna spoil it. I'm just gonna wait.
Let's go. Rolling on.
There is a lot to unpack there. Remember, this is happening or allegedly happening, just as the Department of Justice, via shadowy figures in the American intelligence community, are gearing up to steal the Promise software from William Hamilton and Inslaw. This is when the Cabazon-Wackenhut partnership was flourishing, as they made and shipped weapons to God knows where. Think of the alleged promise of $5 billion worth of arms to Iran I just quoted.
Right.
Mm-hmm. This is when the BCCI is thriving with corrupt loans and branches, when the CIA used the bank accounts to help their interests in places like Iran. This time also leads to more people speaking out, like Wikinoshudo and Casellaro and Wiltshire. This attorney, Paul Wiltshire, is very interesting and will be coming up later. But I will say now that he was the last of 3 lawyers that tried to help Wikinoshudo when he was behind bars in the 1990s. The reason Ari Ben-Menashe knows so much about this Paris meeting is because he says he was there, as well as Wikinoshudo, who said he helped facilitate such meetings and bribes for the higher-ups. So they were like lackey level people. One of those higher-ups was an asshole we talked about in the last show, Earl Bryan, the man with CIA connections and tech companies that stole the Promise software from Inslaw. Quote, amazingly, even Wikinoshudo's allegations about Bryan's involvement in the so-called October surprise could also be verified, at least to a degree. Bryan had told several persons that he planned to visit Paris the weekend of the October surprise meetings, and Ari Ben-Menashe, who claimed to be present at the Paris meetings, said, quote, I saw Bryan in Paris, unquote. What do you think of
that? What do I think of it? But the connections now with the arms.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah.
Back to the Cabazon Band of Mission Indians and
right back to the first episode and second episode.
Whoa. Okay.
There were investigations into the October surprise, of course. The TV news series Frontline produced a documentary in 1991, which investigated evidence about how both the Carter and Reagan camps may have tried to forge secret deals with the Iranian hostages. A man named Gary Sick, he's not sick, his name is Sick. Gary Sick published an editorial in the New York Times in November 1991 and wrote a book titled October Surprise, America's Hostages in Iran and the Election of Ronald Reagan. Sick's credibility was high because he was a retired naval captain who had served on Ford's, Carter's, and Reagan's National Security Council. Quote, Sick wrote that in October 1980, officials in Ronald Reagan's presidential campaign, including future CIA Director William Casey, made a secret deal with Iran to delay the release of the American hostages until after the election. In return for this, the United States purportedly arranged for Israel to ship weapons to Iran, unquote. The Senate investigation in November 1992 found that the evidence fell short to prove this October surprise theory. In 1993, the House of Representatives report concluded the same. For the public and skeptics of the politics of that era, they immediately saw that there was something suspicious with those 52 hostages when Iran released them only minutes after Ronald Reagan concluded his 20-minute inaugural address. They were not very subtle about this.
No.
Now you look at it, right? It's not very subtle. There was so much chatter concerning the October surprise, the name coined in an issue of Executive Intelligence Review in December 1980. However, the height of this conspiracy came years into the Reagan administration when the Iran-Contra affair occurred. Publications like Newsweek had said that the Iran-Contra created fertile ground for the October surprise theory, meaning since this affair, which broke in November of 1986, was true, then it makes sense that the October surprise one could be too, right? Quote, an article by Bob Woodward and Walter Pincus a few days later in the November 29th, 1986, the Washington Post said that the United States officials tied to Reagan well before the Iran-Contra affair considered an initiative to sell U.S.-made military parts to Iran in exchange for the hostages held there. The House October Surprise Task Force credited the Woodward-Pincus article as raising claims that would become keystones in the October surprise theory, unquote. You know Bob Woodward?
Oh, absolutely. Woodward and Bernstein. Watergate.
Yep, that's the Bob Woodward, right? Who teamed up with Carl Bernstein and did the original reporting on the Watergate scandal that led to Nixon's downfall.
Absolutely.
The famous film, All the President's Men, is based on this.
Fantastic movie.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. Fantastic movie. This is deep throat territory we're talking about.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. The Iran-Contra affair is far more convoluted, but that's because it builds on previous history like the October surprise theory and the overall American involvement in the Middle East. I'll try my best to simplify. The following comes from history.com. I went simpler on this.
It's okay.
Quote, because something, quote, the Iran-Contra affair was a secret U.S. arms deal that traded missiles and other arms to free some Americans held hostage by terrorists in Lebanon, but also used funds from the arms deal to support armed conflict in Nicaragua. The controversial deal, the ensuing political scandal, threatened to bring down the presidency of Ronald Reagan, unquote. That's maybe too simplified, so let's add some color. Winning the White House didn't have the political momentum Reagan needed to push his agendas, especially when the GOP was taken from the majority in both the Senate and the House. This resulted in the Reagan Doctrine, which is a promise to assist anti-communist insurgencies around the world. You can see where this is going already. Having taken control of Congress, Democrats passed something called the Boland Amendment, which restricted the activities of the CIA and the DoD in foreign conflicts. This amendment was supposed to prevent things like the Iran-Contra affair and the Sandinistas in Nicaragua. Quote, meanwhile, in the Middle East, where U.S. relations with many nations were strained to the breaking point, two regional powers, Iraq and Iran, were engaged in bloody conflict. At the same time, Iranian-backed terrorists in Hezbollah were holding hostage 7 Americans, diplomats and private contractors, in Lebanon. Reagan delivered another ultimatum to his advisors: find a way to bring those hostages home. In 1985, McFarland sought to do just that. He told Reagan that Iran had approached the United States about purchasing weapons for its war against neighboring Iraq. There was, however, a U.S. trade embargo with Iran at the time, dating back to that country's revolution and subsequent overthrow of, we talked about him, Shah Pahlavi of Iran, during which 52 American hostages were held for 444 days in a diplomatic standoff known as the Iran hostage crisis, or for us, the October surprise. Although several months of Reagan's administration opposed it, including Secretary of State George Shultz and Secretary of Defense Caspar Weinberger, McFarland argued that an arms deal with Iran would not only secure the release of the hostages, but it would help the United States improve relations with Lebanon, providing the country with an ally in a region where it desperately needed one. And, as an aside, the arms deal would secure funds that the CIA could secretly funnel to the Contra insurgency in Nicaragua. This is with the backing of McFarland and CIA Director William Casey, Reagan pushed ahead with the trade, over the objections of Weinberger and Schultz, unquote. So in comes Oliver North. Have you heard of him?
Ollie North.
Yes, okay. So even you know him. Okay. Yeah.
Well, if I can, real quick, what I remember is when I would come home from school, I would want to go to the TV and watch some cartoons, man. But every day was the goddamn Iran-Contra scandal with fucking Oliver North sitting there getting deposed.
Yeah.
And I couldn't watch my cartoons. That was the center of my life.
Yes.
It was disrupting my life.
I know that pain.
Contra. Yes.
I definitely know that pain. Wow, that's pretty funny. That's how you know. That's how you remember him.
That's how I
was like, maybe Jay's too young for this, But like, because you're old, but in reality, you're not that old. So you were just a child. But I guess you remember the breaking Animaniacs or whatever, Mighty Mouse to bring you this message, right? All right. So in comes Oliver North. By the time this arms deal was reported in the press, first by Al Jazeera, the Lebanese newspaper, in 1986, the Americans had sold 1,500 missiles to Iran for $30 million. Attorney General Edwin Meese launched an investigation and found that 18 out of the 20 million were missing or unaccounted for. Quote, it was then that Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North of the National Security Council came forward to acknowledge that he had diverted the missing funds to the Contras in Nicaragua, who used them to, acquire weapons. North said that he had done so with the full knowledge of National Security Advisor Admiral John Poindexter. He assumed Reagan was also aware of his efforts, unquote. I talked about Edwin Meese in the last show as having connections with Earl Bryan, helping him with Inslaw and stealing promise from Bill Hamilton. Anyway, it was seen that Reagan's lack of oversight enabled the people he appointed to divert funds to the Contras. Despite the fact that this followed the Reagan doctrine, he said he wasn't fully aware and only partially. The press and colleagues hounded the Reagan administration over this and launched several investigations. An 8-year investigation led to 14 people being charged for what was called the Iran-Contra affair, including Oliver North, Poindexter, and McFarland. Remember what I said in the last episode about conspiracies. Even if unaware, you are responsible for your actions when charged or tied to a conspiracy, hence why people like Poindexter was charged. It should be noted that Reagan was never charged, and key players like North were given slaps on the wrists for the laws they broke. The Bolin Amendment I mentioned earlier was meant to stop something like this from happening. Some people in power saw what places like Lebanon, Iran, and Nicaragua were leading to and tried to take actions with the amendment, but it failed. You see, the anti-communist group, the Contras, were fighting the communist government called the Sandinistas, while Reagan was in office. Reagan described the Contras as, quote, the moral equivalent of the founding fathers, unquote. I know, yes. He's an actor. What do you want?
Yeah, good call.
Right. And wanted to help, again, as one can see from the Reagan doctrine. It makes sense he would want to help. He asked his national security advisor, Robert McFarland, to find a way to assist no matter the monetary or political costs. Where are the connections between this Iran-Contra affair and the Octopus, you might ask? I'm going to requote a paragraph from the last show. Now I'm recording myself. This is ridiculous. Yes, sorry, that wasn't the script. It's part of the affidavit Michael Riconosciuto made on March 1st, 1981. Quote, the Wackenhut-Cabazon joint venture was intended to support the needs of a number of foreign governments' forces, including forces and governments in Central America and the Middle East. The Contras in Nicaragua represented one of the most important priorities for the joint venture, unquote.
There it is.
That's it. I did all that just to tie that one in there. I don't really have to say any more because you know all about that reservation, the security firm with ties to the Middle East, rogue government elements selling Inslaw software to other countries, and now the banking and political opportunities they took to understand this. Everything is connected.
It's amazing. It really is.
Yeah.
So is Octopus, maybe this is too soon, is Octopus the shadow government that everyone's always talking about?
Yes. The one I mentioned that Wiltshire quoted? Yes. That's what they are.
Shit.
You're like, shit, what am I going to do now?
Wow.
What? Yeah, that was funny. That was just a funny response. Yeah, so that's the Reagan administration segment. So much unsaid, really, but that's how it connects to us. Now, on to the next one here. Missy, have you heard of the Nugan Hand Bank scandal?
I have not.
This one I added in late in the show. I wasn't going to add it in, but then I found too much connections, of course, so I went with it. So this next segment is shorter but potent. Nugan Hand Bank was an Australian merchant bank that had a short lifespan of 7 years, from 73 to 1980. Founded by an Australian lawyer, Frank Nugan, and co-founded by former U.S. Green Beret Michael John Hand, or Mike Hand. This bank is the smaller yet still loud version of the BCCI in its controversy and illegal activities. According to our historian, the bank was formed with a fraudulent claim of $1 million in share capital, and Nugan wrote his own company a personal check of $980,000 to buy 490,000 shares of its stock. This bank attracted... like, I see your head, sorry.
Come on.
What kind of balls do people have here? The bank attracted investors with promises of up to 16% interest rates on their deposits. What? You're right?
I would join that shit too.
So promises of up to 16% interest. Okay, I can't imagine.
You can't even say it with a straight face. That's like finding the pot at the end of the rainbow. Holy shit.
Yes, clearly. Sorry. Serious face. Promises of up to 16% interest rates on their deposits and assurances of anonymity and tax-free accounts. Right after its collapse, a former employee said that the Nugan Hand Bank paid commission of up to 2.5% on unsecured investments of $1 million or more, while the standard at the time was only 0.5%.
Amazing.
Mm-hmm. They had special investment assistance and services, such as money laundering. Who knew?
They have that on line. It's a line item on
I'm telling you, it must have been. The way people talk about it, it must have been. That's the only way it makes sense to me. Quote, Nugan Hand rapidly gained business and expanded its offices from a single Sydney office to a global network that included branches in Chiang Mai, Manila, Hawaii, Singapore, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Washington, D.C., and the Cayman Islands, where it was registered. Wait, we talked about Cayman, right?
Of course, yeah.
Unquote. The Chiang Mai office in Thailand was interesting because it was the heart of the Golden Triangle heroin trade. Perfect for money laundering, really. The perfect spot, really.
Wow.
It reminds me of BCCI setting up shop in Colombia for the cocaine.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Anyway, Nugan Bank gained a certain level of respectability when it hired, or by hiring, retired U.S. military and intelligence personnel, such as former Rear Admiral Earl P. Yates and bank president and ex-CIA head William Colby. This Colby character is someone to watch out for. In World War II, he served with the Office of Strategic Services. Afterwards, Colby joined the newly created CIA and became station chief in Saigon before and during the Vietnam War. He was overseer of the Phoenix operation. You ever heard of the Phoenix operation?
I haven't, no.
Or Operation Phoenix, maybe.
No.
Which was designed by the CIA and involved the U.S., Australia, and South Vietnamese to identify and destroy Viet Cong. This included infiltration, torture, capture, counterterrorism, and assassination. It may also explain his Australian connection to joining Nugan Bank later on. For the record, I, like other people in the series, believe Colby to be a member of the Octopus. Yes. Anyway, Nugan Hand Bank's downfall was precipitated by the death of Frank Nugan on January 27th, 1980. He was facing charges on stock fraud when he was found dead in his car in New South Wales by a .30 caliber rifle shot. It was deemed a suicide, but the lack of fingerprints on the weapon and questions regarding the police who found Nugan dead were left unanswered. Also, people thought it suspicious when William Colby's business card was found in the vehicle.
Shit.
I don't know if it was a calling card or what he was doing. From here, people asked more questions about the bank and its dealings, which led to investigations. Michael Hand and Earl Yates had ordered important company documents destroyed or hidden as the authorities found Nugan's office ransacked. This apparent suicide made front-page news, and after destroying records, Hand fled Australia under a false identity in June 1980. There were 3 major investigations from New South Wales and the Royal Commission of Inquiry looking into the scandal and its drug money connections, which even included a link to former Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos to the bank. Mm-hmm.
He was using that other bank too with Saddam.
You remembered. Good.
I do, yeah.
That's good. I'm glad. I was worried that people would just miss that entirely. Quote, the Royal Commission found that the Nugan Hand Bank was implicated in money laundering, illegal tax avoidance schemes, and widespread violations of banking laws. One witness, a former New Hand director, stated that Hand threatened bank executives, quote within the quote, if we didn't do what we were told and things weren't handled properly, our wives would be cut into pieces and put in boxes and sent back to us. However, the Royal Commission, did not find credible evidence of drug smuggling, arms dealing, and the CIA involvement, unquote.
Sure.
Yeah, sure.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Sure, Jan. To which I say, what? What? This result astonished people and ultimately said that the Royal Commission, from a government's perspective, decided that having good relationships with the Australian Security Intelligence Organization, ASIO, and the CIA was more important than implicating them. So it was a political reason why they said that, I think. Now, what happened to Mike Hand? He was technically never found, or should I say, never brought to justice. An Australian magazine in 1991, this is 10 years or so after, an Australian magazine in 1991 reported that Hand was living in the United States, even giving details like the address in the article.
Ouch. Doxed.
Yeah, right. The Australian government did not make a move on any possible extradition, by the way. In a book titled Merchants of Menace, I love that. Merchants of Menace, the true story of the Nugan Hand Bank scandal, author Peter Butt, I swear to God, that's his last name, B-U-T-T, Peter Butt, said that Hand was living under the name of Michael John Fuller in Idaho Falls, Idaho. The book was published in 2015. So he's still not caught.
Wow.
He's fine still. As far as we know, anyway. I guess if we see an obituary for Michael John Fuller, then we can say, oh, okay, he died. Anyway, as usual, the connections between the Octopus and the Nugan Hand Bank was emphasized by Danny Casolaro. Through Michael Wikunashudo, he was able to find these drug connections like the Golden Triangle trade, as well as arms deals. Quote, other Nugan Hand officers included a network of U.S. generals, admirals, and CIA employees. Their identities officially surfaced 2 decades later in Texas when a judge unsealed classified CIA internal documents in response to an appeal filed in a Houston federal court. The appeal was filed by Edwin Wilson, a former CIA agent convicted in the U.S. for selling C4 high explosives to Libya and charged with supplying trained men, arms, and technology to Libya and other military buyers. He had served 17 years of a 25-year sentence and was eligible for parole. At his 1983 trial, Wilson never identified his compatriots with the Nugan Hand Galaxy, but David Adler, his appeals lawyer in 1999, reviewed hundreds of CIA documents confirming Wilson's relationship with William Colby, Thomas Clines, Bernie Houghton, and others with Nugan Hand Bank. And as an aside real quick, all of these are Octopus people.
They're all Octopus people.
Except for Bernie Houghton, probably. But William Colby, Thomas Clines, Edwin Wilson, yeah. Just an aside. I don't know why I didn't put that in the script, but I'm just telling you. Just between you and I,
Between us girls.
Yeah, between us girls. The Texas Observer had reported in 1991 that CIA officials Theodore Shackley, chief of clandestine operations in the Far East in the mid-1970s, and Thomas Clines, along with their subordinate, Edwin Wilson, utilized secret bank accounts at Nugan Hand to fund a variety of covert operations, including destabilization of Australia's Labour Party in 1975. Both Shackley and Clines would later resurface as key figures in the Iran-Contra scandal. I didn't mention them on purpose, by the way. Maurice Bernard Houghton, the closest friend and advisor to Michael Hand, had daringly traded goods all over Southeast Asia war zone in the 1960s. The mysterious Texan played an active role in Nugan Hand's affairs since its inception in 1973, according to the Wall Street Journal in 1982. Unquote. Oh, that was cool. It should be noted that no one connected with Nugan Hand has ever been convicted of a crime. No one. I will also note something that it is obvious about Edwin Wilson's sentence. The quote mentioned that in addition to explosives and trained men, he sold technology to Libya. That technology was most likely the promised software. 1983 fits the timeline, and Libya does show up on the long list of countries where people like Earl Bryan sold the Inslaw software. Lastly, I'll note that we are getting further back in time here. The Octopus Tendrils didn't just operate in the 70s and 80s and 90s. We just got our first real series of hits from the 50s and 60s with the creation of the CIA and highly suspected individuals that operated in the Vietnam War. Food for thought as we sink deeper here.
You know what I've realized so far listening to these episodes? I live a real boring fucking life. I mean, these guys, they got their hands in everything.
Like, oh, a pie. Oh, a pie. Let me put my hand in that one. All right. Oh, a pie.
Yeah. What a boring life I live. Jesus.
That's funny that's what you get out of it.
Sorry. No, continue. This is great.
No, this next one's gonna break your heart. Or lift your spirits. Do both at once. Let's see. This next segment is called Connections, Suspects, and Mysterious Deaths.
Yes.
You look at your face. All right.
Look.
Yeah, it is. It's that one, yes. This section might be the most interesting one and the longest. It'll basically cover everything I couldn't fit into all the previous segments in the trilogy of episodes.
Oh, man.
This is because I thought it might confuse an already confusing spiderweb of information or a point of a story I was trying to tell. Or it could be because I felt it juicier to wait until this time to reveal it, now that the major Octopus events have been revealed. Or I just fucking forgot. I did forget some key things, though, for real. I will disclose mini bios on people suspected as members of the Octopus. These entries have no particular order, and their lengths vary, and I'll pause for a moment between them. Expect a lot of quotes here. I'm going to start with an easy one. Back on the Octopus Murders, the first show of the series, when discussing Danny Casolaro, I mentioned that a few days before his death, Danny had shown his friend Ben Mason several important papers about his research. One of those was a photocopy of a passport of someone named Ibrahim. Authorities found no connections to this Ibrahim, but it was obvious that people believed that Casolaro might have met him in a Martinsburg bar a day before he died. The reason I never explained it at the time, because I wasn't yet sure where it would lead, and I didn't have enough information to reveal it. But now I do. He showed him a 22-point outline for his book, plus alarming papers referring to the Iran-Contra arms deals. He had photocopies of a $1 million check and a $4 million check drawn from BCCI accounts that were held by an international arms merchant named Anand Khashoggi, by another arms dealer and middleman to the Iran-Contra scandal, Manusher Gurbanifar. Love that name. I just love saying that. Gurbanifar. Anyway, it's like a Pokemon. Gurbanifar, I choose you. Anyway, in this stack of photocopies, Ben Mason noticed Ibrahim's passport as the last sheet. Quote, Casolaro had emphasized that Ibrahim had made a big deal of showing him, Casolaro, his Egyptian passport. Ibrahim was obviously the informant whom Olga, Casolaro's housekeeper, had seen sitting in the kitchen with Danny on August 5th. Hassan Ali Ibrahim Ali, born in 1928, was later identified as the manager of Citico, an alleged Iraqi front company for arms purchases. Castellero had obtained these papers from his confidant, Bob Bickle, who in turn obtained them from October's surprise source, Richard Brennicke. Neither Danny or Bob Bickle were aware at the time of a document from the U.S. Department of Justice dated May 16, 1985, written by William Bradford Reynolds, Assistant Attorney General in the Civil Rights Division, to William Weld, United States Attorney in Boston, advising Mr. Weld that the promised software was being provided to an Arab sheikh for resale and general distribution in his region. The letter read as follows. Dear Mr. Weld, as agreed, Messrs. Manisher Gurbanifar, Adnan Khashoggi, and Richard Armitage will broker the transaction of promised software to Sheikh Khalid bin Mahfouz for resale and general distribution as gifts in his region contingent upon the three conditions we last spoke of. Promise the software, it means, must have a soft arrival. No paperwork, customs, or delay. It must be equipped with a special data retrieval unit. As before, you must walk the financial aspects through Credit Suisse International Commerce Bank. If you encounter any problems, contact me directly. Sincerely, W.M. Bradford Reynolds, Assistant Attorney General, Civil Rights Division. Bill Hamilton, owner of Inslaw, said he had received this document in the mail in November 2004 from a consistently reliable U.S. intelligence source. He said Donald Carr showed the document to Bradford Reynolds in 2005. Carr was writing a biography of Elliot Richardson and served with Reynolds in the Edwin Meese and Richard Thornburg Justice Department as a Republican political appointee. Reynolds authenticated the document. He told Carr that Lowell Jensen's secretary brought the letter to him for signature because Jensen was out of the building. The letter needed to be sent that day, and it needed to be signed by someone in Edwin Meese's inner circle. He said he signed the letter, but did not draft it. Reynolds said he had a vague recollection that Meese recused himself on promise when he became Attorney General in February 1985, and Jensen said, therefore, to handle promise. Reynolds told Carr that he had an independent memory of Armitage, Khashoggi, and Gurbanifar working together on promise. Unquote. I know. Yes, the names that sound familiar to you have been talked about before in this series. Elliot Richardson, Edwin Meese, and Richard Thornburg are all mentioned in the last episode.
Yeah.
Yeah, Elliot Richardson being the hotshot lawyer that said, fuck you, Nixon, to Watergate. Yeah. All copies of this document were supposed to have been destroyed, but somehow made it to Hamilton in 2004. Firstly, I wanted to get to Adnan Khashoggi and other names like Manisher Gurbanifar in the Iran-Contra section of this episode, but the flow would have been interrupted when I was connecting Castellero and the Octopus to the Reagan administration, so here we are. Anyway, this Adnan Khashoggi, have you heard of him? Okay. Adnan Khashoggi was a big deal in several circles. He was the richest man in the world in the 1980s.
Huh.
Mm-hmm. And his yacht, Nabila, was used in the James Bond film Never Say Never Again.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm. He had his own custom Monopoly board game of his properties.
Oh, you son of a bitch.
Yeah. And the Queen has a song called Khashoggi Ship.
No shit.
So, yeah, pretty popular guy.
Big deal. Yeah.
Yeah. Khashoggi's sister, Samira, was the mother of Dodi Zayed. Dodi Zayed, do you know that name?
That sounds familiar.
That should. You're about to find out. Khashoggi's sister, Samira, was the mother of Dodi Zayed, an Egyptian and millionaire film producer who was romantically involved with Princess Diana of Wales.
That's it. Oh.
They both died on August 31st, 1997 in Paris. It became one of the most televised tragedies in that decade, spawning many films and documentaries and conspiracies. By the way, I'm not saying that the octopus has anything to do with Princess Diana's untimely death.
Oh, I thought I was like,
people definitely say that. I'm not saying that. Yes, people say that. I'm only establishing Adnan Khashoggi's wealth and power, and that again, everything is connected. That should be show. That's what I should call the show. Everything's connected because everyone should get it through their skulls. Anyway, Khashoggi was a key middleman and the Iran-Contra affair in the exchange of arms for hostages, along with Gorbachev. This was a complex series of events where investigators found that money borrowed from BCCI was used for these arms purchases, having the U.S. and Saudi backing. In addition to this, Khashoggi was arrested in 1988 for hiding funds, was held for 3 months before being extradited to the U.S., where he was acquitted.
Of course.
Yeah. The U.S. in 1990 acquitted Khashoggi and Imelda Marcos, widow of Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos, of fraud and racketeering. In case you're not sure, I mentioned Ferdinand Marcos ever so briefly on the show as having ties to both BCCI and the Nugan Hand Bank. Yeah. I also mentioned that a Lebanese magazine, Al Jazeera, was first to break the story of the Iran-Contra affair. They were tipped off by a regular contributor of this series, Ari Ben-Menashe. I'm sorry I lied, but that wasn't so easy. Instead of one, I gave you like 5 connections there that began with the passport. Yeah. This is how research for the show has been for me. I'd read something about a company and the people that run it, and they're close friends with people with another event or affair, which in turn are connected to a government project of some kind. And before you can say Octopus, you're lost and I'm lost.
Well said.
That was just that whole thing. I just wrote it verbatim as I followed through the line of research. That's how it would look like if I didn't like pad it.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Don't worry. That's the only jokey. I mean, it's real. It's all real, but like, that's the only one that's like that. All right. This next one. What is it? Oh, I know. I'm trying to read ahead, see where I'm at. Anyway, I'm going to quote a series of connections from Sherry Seymour's book, The Last Circle, as I have been, here and there, to springboard a man I want to discuss. Quote, Castellera was also investigating Colonel Bo Gritz's expose of CIA drug trafficking in the Golden Triangle and had requested to meet with a former police officer who had information on Laotian warlord Kun Sa's Golden Triangle drug trade proposal to the U.S. Gritz had staged several expeditions to Laos in search of missing POWs, but reportedly stumbled upon a massive drug network in Southeast Asia, and American POWs were intertwined in that network, he told the Sacramento Bee on June 6, 1987. Gritz had been indicted in May of 1987 for using a false passport under the name of Patrick Richard Clark from Vancouver, Canada, but at his arraignment before a U.S. magistrate in Las Vegas, he said he had proper authorization for his travels. Castellera also learned through Sacramento Bee newspaper article dated June 2nd, 1990, that Patrick Moriarty, the Red Devil fireworks magnate, convicted of money laundering political contributions and bribing officials in Sacramento, had been subpoenaed to testify on behalf of Gritz at his trial in Las Vegas. Gritz was acquitted of the charges. Moriarty's lawyer, Jan Lawrence Hanslick, told the Bee that Moriarty had paid Gritz to make business trips to China, Singapore, and other parts of Asia. Gritz said his business trip to Asia in July of 1989 was for the purpose of negotiating an oil interest that he and Moriarty had set up between the People's Republic of China and Indonesia. At the time of Gritz's trial, Patrick Moriarty was the long-time, 30 years, partner of Marshall Riconosciuto, Michael Riconosciuto's father. They owned several California businesses together, 2 of which were Hercules Research Corporation, of which Michael was a partner, and Pyrotronics Corporation. I privately mused after reading the Bee article that Michael Hand, before he founded Nugan Hand Bank in Australia with Frank Nugan and officials of the CIA-owned Air America, had been a highly decorated Special Forces Green Beret soldier in Vietnam. Colonel Bo Gritz was also a highly decorated Green Beret in Vietnam, and both Gritz and Hand had special knowledge of intelligence operations in Golden Triangle. After his first stint in Vietnam, Hand moved to the clandestine CIA war in Laos, according to a former station chief in Indonesia, Ted Shackley. The Nugan Hand Bank, a primary CIA operation in the Pacific area, reportedly laundered profits from drug trafficking in the Golden Triangle, which in turn financed subversive paramilitary activities in Southeast Asia. In 1980, the Nugan Hand Bank collapsed, $5 million in debt, and Michael Hand disappeared, unquote. And we know the rest of that story. So that is a long connection of Rico Nishiro's lineage, his father, that leads into what led to the Nugan Hand Bank scandal.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, it's a backwards, real deep cut fucking connection there.
This stuff is, it's so
never ending. Yeah. It's never ending. So I'm gonna talk about the person that I want to talk about based on that story I just said. I'm gonna start bringing in the wilder side of these theories and allegations. Things might get less believable as we progress. Remember that former Vietnam chief, Ted Shackley? That's who I want to focus on next. He was mentioned for the first time in this episode in the Nugan Hand Bank scandal segment. He joined the military in 1945 as a private and became part of the Allied occupied force in basic training, learning counterintelligence, and recruiting Polish agents. He apparently spoke Polish. Very soon after, Shackley was bred to be a spook as one of the first wave of recruits in CIA history in 1953. From 62 to 65, Shackley was station chief in Miami, Florida. Can you think of what was happening in Miami during this time?
Drugs.
Nice. A little bit, but no. Shackley, along with Thomas Clines, dealt with operations held in Cuba, and the Miami CIA station was called JM Wave, which had more than 200 CIA officers who then handled roughly 2,000 Cuban agents. A big and popular project Shackley and others headed was called Operation Mongoose, which served to help Cuban exiles to overthrow the communist regime in Cuba, primarily Fidel Castro. Quote, during this period as Miami station chief, Shackley was in charge of about 400 agents and general operatives, and his tenure encompassed the Cuban Missile Crisis of October 1962, unquote. But it kept growing, Billy. At its height, this JM Wave became the largest CIA station in the world, employing over 3,000 agents and operating over 50 dummy corporations. You may or may not know this, but the Cuban situation was severely complex. There were so many entities for and mainly against Castro and from the U.S. government, agencies within the U.S. government, Coca-Cola and other businessmen, exiled and pissed off Cubans, mafia dons, and many more. Castro's revolution in 1959 resulted in kicking out the mafia from Cuban casinos, which the CIA used to launder payments to those mobsters. This partnership of the OSS and CIA with the mafia began with something called Operation Underworld. But I'm not going to get into that right now, and I heavily digress here. This show isn't about the Cuban shitstorm. My point here is that the CIA and mob targeted Cuban leaders for assassination. People like Mafia dos Santos Traficante, working through Frank Sturgis, and Richard Watley, a mercenary. Cuban assassination teams included Felix Rodriguez, Rafael Quintero, under the supervision of E. Howard Hunt, whose boss was station chief Theodore Shackley. Look those names up and have fun with that, by the way. Just look them up. Here's something cool. And by cool, I mean horrifyingly believable. Quote, also alleged to have been involved in assassination attempts on Castro, it's Dr. John P. Nichols, the administrator in the Cabazon Whack and Hunt venture, which Danny Casolaro investigated, unquote.
Oh, what?
Yeah. He was a spook. We just didn't know what he did.
Shit.
Yeah. This Cuban era for Shackley is but a rest stop. So we're going to move on here. From here, Shackley went to Vietnam, which I mentioned earlier was a station chief that was involved in Operation Phoenix to torture and detain Viet Cong. In this setting, Shackley worked with people like Colby, a prominent figure in the Nugan Hand Bank scandal, as well as many others. Operation Phoenix was run by Shackley and Clines with alleged participation by Earl W. Bryan in 74 to 75. They were responsible for killing approximately 60,000 civilian Vietnamese, financed allegedly by Vang Pro drug money. During his Vietnamese phase, Shackley met arms dealer and CIA man Edwin Wilson, becoming close friends. Remember, Wilson's the guy who was arrested for selling C4 explosives in the 90s.
Oh, right.
Sorry. Said that really fast. I'm just like remembering as I go. So where am I? They were close friends. Edwin Wilson was deemed to be a member of the Octopus by Danny Casolaro as well. For the sake of time, I'll skip further background involving Vietnam beyond what I've said already and head to the relationship between George Bush and Ted Shackley, at least a little bit. Quote, the career movements of alleged Octopus member Ted Shackley also illuminate Bush's secret life. From 1952 to 1959 and 1965 to 1966, Shackley worked in Germany. In the 1962 to 64 period, he was station chief in Miami. Shackley became station chief in Saigon and Vietnam from 1964 to 74 and chief of CIA's Far East Division thereafter, while George Bush served as ambassador to China. After Bush's ascension to CIA director, Shackley was promoted to associate deputy director of operations, considered the agency's third most powerful job. Shackley was put in charge of Central American operations, unquote. And we know what the CIA was up to in Central America. One of those Central American operations involved Chile. On September 11th, 1973, the Chilean military under General Augusto Pinochet, aided by the United States and the CIA, staged a coup against Chilean President Salvador Allende. You know this?
No.
Okay. Officially, Allende committed suicide as insurgents stormed the palace, supposedly because he didn't want to suffer the humiliation of his aggressors. It's actually quite a movie scene. Allende was addressing the nation on the radio as they entered, describing himself in the past tense, knowing he's going to die one way or the other.
Oh.
Yeah. Unofficially, it is said that Allende's death was performed by 2 Cubans, as other 8 assassination attempts occurred simultaneously. Shackley and Kleins did the strategy for this operation. That's how they involved. The reason some people find it hard to believe that Allende committed suicide was because the only people there to witness the events were the people out to fucking kill him, meaning unreliable sources and uninterested in dampening any effect the CIA and other insurgencies wanted from this operation. As added bonus, and by his own admission, John P. Nichols was involved in the Allende assassination plot before moving out west to California, apparently just before.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. Casolaro wrote the following about Chile, quote, a different, marginally more officious costume was worn in Chile. Since this operation provided accumulated debt for favors performed, the Octopus now mature enough to know how to collect those debts. What are the favors performed, and what was the due bill? Unquote. That's not all Ted Shackley has to offer. As the third most powerful person in the CIA, Shackley was also involved in the Iran-Contra affair, but mainly in the relationship and events leading up to it. In Libya, Edwin Wilson worked for Gaddafi, training his air force, and provided planes and weapons and techniques relating to assassinations and the sabotage and explosives. This crash course in violent espionage was reported to Ted Shackley in the 70s. Despite being officially retired from CIA in the 80s, during the Iran-Contra affair, Shackley passed information from Manishar Gurbanifar to Oliver North and to people of all sorts, even if Shackley didn't gain or did a lot at this time. There's much more detail and other events I could cover, but once again, I must move on. People like Ted Shackley are fascinating because of how involved they were to one degree or another in major historical events, and they seemingly do it so passively or indifferently. Take his involvement with Cuba, the Middle East, South America, and Vietnam with you as important as his relationships with George Bush Sr. was.
And how was he tied to Senior again?
Bush Sr. Promoted him as third placement when Bush.
Oh, the third most powerful person in the CIA.
When he became the director of CIA, he promoted that guy to the third place post.
I see. Okay, got it.
And then probably William Casey was second player, who was another Octopus guy. And then William Casey took over after Bush wanted to be in politics and then won the election. Well, he became vice president of Ronald Reagan first, right? And then from there, he won presidency.
Yeah.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Which all culminates in the October surprise, because if Reagan didn't win, Bush would never have been probably president.
Okay.
If you go back that far. Yeah. Anyway. Now, okay. Hold on. This next part is designed to fascinate people that are into conspiracies like us and will hopefully serve as something juicy to enjoy amid the confusing history lessons and never-ending connections. I said before that Michael Wikinashuda was one of the prime sources for Danny Castellero's research. He showed the freelance journalists where to find information and who to look into for connections. You might have asked yourself already, why was Wikinashuda allowed to live, since he knew and has seen so much? There are two reasons for this. One is that Wikinashuda claims to have documents and a tape recording involving prominent octopus figures implicating themselves in some, if not all, of the shady doings I've mentioned already in this three-part series. The second reason is that his willingness to tell anyone who asks him questions about everything he saw, makes Wikinashuda kind of a loon prone to conspiracy gossip. If he's right about everything, hell, even half, then it makes him look crazy. And killing someone like that will make him a martyr. Not unlike Castellero, by the way. These allegations Wikinashuda has made is what I'll be getting into here. Well, a few of them anyway. For instance, there was a rumor that the Cabazons belonged to something worldwide called Reservation Operation that was run by the Enterprise and Wackenhut on Indian land. The project name was Yellow Lodge. Have you heard of the Yellow Lodge? It's not super famous. It is low key, but maybe it's famous enough.
I'm gonna say no.
Okay, I never heard of it before this either. In Yellow Lodge, it is said that they produce advanced warfare like pathogenic viruses and biological weapons. Mm-hmm. Operations ran on Jicarilla Apache lands, and other reservations, including an interesting center called D6, located in Dulce, New Mexico. You know D6?
No, but I know Dulce, New Mexico, that's for sure.
Yeah, you fucking will, yeah. Castellero learned through UFO enthusiasts that this D6 location was the site of a huge underground joint human/alien base.
Yeah. More. This is what I've been waiting for.
I know you have. I know. Let's see. Where am I? Other notes of Danny Castellero mentions MJ-12, Area 51, and Pine Gap. What? Your face? I mean, I'm not gonna super get into MJ-12 and Area 51 because we've done this shit.
Majestic 12,
yeah. Pine Gap is supposed to be a top secret underground base located in Alice Springs, Australia, and has the official name of Joint Defense Space Research Facility. While rumors of alien activity have existed, what it's mainly known for is that it served to monitor spy satellites and interception and decoding of various forms of broadcast communications between foreign powers that were unfriendly to the U.S. Quote, Pine Gap was built in 1968, ostensibly as a means of sharing space program data with the Australians. Opposition to the base grew as it became clearer that it had more of a prosaic purpose, espionage, unquote. A book on this subject and secret base demonstrated CIA manipulation, which led to the early end of Australia's administrator of the Labour Party, Gow Whitman. This was because he opposed Pine Gap operations, by the way. Quote, one early page of Danny's notes seemingly ties together Area 51, Pine Gap, a small Pennsylvania town called Tonoma, and possibly one of its citizens, someone named Fred Dick. Perhaps tracing one of many convoluted dead ends that Danny traced, the authors of this book dispatched an investigator to Tonoma, PA, in the notes, but failed to find Dick. I know it sounds bad. Even after placing a classified in the local newspaper, or any indication of what they may have linked him to the mysterious military bases. Buried in notes written much later, however, were references to Tonopah, Nevada, near Area 51. Fred Dick, however, remains a mystery, unquote.
We were there by Tonopah. Remember?
Yep, we were. Anyway, what do you think of that?
So, okay. I was so taken back where you went right there. So I guess I missed the connection.
Oh, wait.
So Casolero, what was the implication there?
So, also, through Rick Shudo, he said that there was a theory. Not he didn't say this is a theory. He said that this happened, but we don't know for sure. That Cabazon Band of Mission Indians belong to something called reservation operation, where they use other reservation lands to build weapons, mainly biological warfare stuff. And that one of those was called D6, and that connects aliens to it. D6 was supposedly the Dulce, what's it called? Fuck me. Dulce New Mexico. Yeah. And that's where UFO enthusiasts say that there's a base there that's human/alien heavy. And then from there, I went with Pine Gap because that was one of the three places that Kessler had wrote in his notes to research later. Pine Gap, and I mentioned what they were, an Australian base for espionage.
Got it.
They fucked up the leader there. And then from there, I put in the one last thing about Danny's notes saying the Area 51, Pine Gap, and the small town of Tonoma and Fred Dick. At the end, there's like a little whatever, based on what the Wiccan should have told them.
Got it.
Yeah, that's how it connects.
Love it.
Yes, here's another one. Here's another rumor / allegation about Wiccan Shudo, or from Wiccan Shudo. It is said that in addition to what we already know of him, he also worked for Lear Aircraft in Reno, Nevada. The speculation that evolved from here is that it immediately ties Wiccan Shudo with John Lear Sr., creator of the Learjet, and is someone that UFO conspiracy theorists claim to have worked or done research on anti-gravity for the government. The connection here is that Lear Jr., not Sr., Jr., who also worked with his father, had many stories of flying saucers and aliens, even befriending the infamous Bob Lazar.
Ooh.
Mm-hmm. Both men would appear in gatherings to tell their stories to believers. Two other connections are William Cooper and Gordon Novel. Cooper wrote a book that discusses the JFK assassination, Area 51, and the Elders of Zion. Novel was supposedly a minor player in both the Kennedy assassination and the Watergate scandal by his own admission, though people do not believe it. Some have even suggested that this wild claim about Gordon Novel is a way to distract from serious and real issues about Black Project weapons development and governmental gun running. Short and sweet allegation right there.
Yeah, love it.
Yep. That's probably the shortest one I got here. Let's see here. Next one. This next bit is the sweetest in my arsenal, especially for the supernatural occurrence studies. It involves a little bit of aliens and a lot more into the assassination of John F. Kennedy. We all know that Kennedy, before his death, wanted to splinter the CIA into 1,000 pieces, mainly for the Bay of Pigs fiasco, but he didn't get the chance, obviously. While being able to fire CIA old sacred cows like Allen Dulles, the CIA continued in the shadows of its creators. People like Richard Helms, who became director of the CIA in 1966, and E. Howard Hunt. Hunt is the important connection here because Casolero had spoken with him on the phone and believed was not only a CIA spook, but an octo-spook as well. That's what he called them, octo-spooks.
I love that term, octo-spook.
Yeah, it's great. Hunt had helped set up the Bay of Pigs, was one of the plumbers on the Watergate scandal, and supposedly was involved in MK Ultra. Allegations that Hunt and a man named Frank Sturgis, another Watergate burglar, were in Dallas on the day of the assassination. People say that they were the two of the three hobos on the railroad tracks behind the motherfucking grassy knoll who were arrested by Dallas police.
Whoa.
Mm-hmm. Quote, Mark Lane, one of the earliest critics of the Warren Commission, documented Hunt's inability to defend himself in court against accusations of his presence in Dallas in his book, Plausible Denial. One of Lane's key witnesses in that trial, Marita Lorenz, named E. Howard Hunt, Frank Sturgis, Orlando Bosch, Lee Harvey Oswald, the Noble brothers, Jerry Patrick Hemming, and Pedro Diaz Lance as part of a convoy that traveled from Miami to Dallas for the JFK hit, unquote. There's also a follow-up connection between George Bush and a close associate to Oswald's, George de Mohrenschildt, but that is a can of worms I'm not ready to open today. I am purposely staying away from Bush, to be honest. Now, this next dose of information is crazy. I'll be quoting the whole chunk here because I cannot reveal it any better than they did. Okay. Quote, Rick Shudo had his own intergenerational connection to the UFO lore and his own link to the Kennedy assassination. His father, Marshall, had been a business associate of Fred Chrisman, a man involved in the Maury Island incident, one of the earliest UFO incidents to follow pilot Kenneth Arnold's famed flying discs over Mount Rainier in 1947. Arnold, in fact, investigated claims by Chrisman and Harold Dahl that Dahl, his son, his dog, and 2 others witnessed 6 saucers as the crew boated in the Puget Sound along the shore of Maury Island. Dahl's child was burned and his dog killed when one of the saucers spewed metallic debris on the boat. Chrisman and Dahl mailed metal fragments of the debris to Amazon's Amazing Stories editor Ray Palmer, who hired Kenneth Arnold himself to investigate. Confused by what he was hearing from Chrisman and Dahl, Arnold called in 2 Air Force intelligence officers. They concluded some interviews, collected some of the debris, and were headed back to home base on a B-25 when an explosion on their early morning flight killed them both. The Maury Island incident was written off for years as a hoax, but recent research has brought up the possibility that Chrisman used his possession of the saucer debris as a means to a career among the spooks. Flying saucer crash retrieval rumors mounted in 1947 near the Riconoscudo stopping ground in Tacoma, Washington. The Tacoma News Tribune reported upon a retrieval by William Guy Bannister, the FBI special agent in charge of the area at the time. Bannister became famous much later in life when he shared office space with the Fair Play for Cuba Committee in New Orleans, possibly employing Lee Harvey Oswald as an agent provocateur. Chrisman, too, had been connected to Oswald via a subpoena from the investigation of JFK's death by New Orleans District Attorney Jim Garrison. Some allege that Chrisman was one of the 3 hobos photographed after their arrest in the railroad yard behind the infamous grassy knoll on November 22nd, 1963. Chrisman was notably silent about both Maury Island and JFK in his 1970 memoir of life in Tacoma entitled Murder of a City, written under the pseudonym of John Gold. He did have warm comments about Marshall Riconoscudo, however, and recounted that the young Michael had discovered several electronic bugs at his father's office. Unquote.
Ooh, a lot going on there. So we talked about the Maury Island incident.
Yeah.
I don't remember if it was in our extraterrestrial extravaganza episodes or what, but yep, I remember that quite well. The explosion of the airplane and these ties to the JFK assassination. I mean, that's just amazing. And
do you remember Guy Bannister?
The name sounds so familiar.
He's definitely involved in Operation Mongoose and shit. Yeah,
I see. Huh. Yeah, and now you got Riconoscudo's father. So you said that the multi-generational thing.
Yes.
Riconoscudo's father's tied into the UFO side, the Kennedy assassination side.
Yep.
His son found the bugs in his office. I mean, Jesus Christ. Does this ever end?
No. What you have to understand is that both Riconoscudo and Chrisman were from Tacoma, Washington. Tacoma is a little over an hour away from Mount Rainier and Maury Island, or the Puget Sound. Chrisman's twilight years were Riconoscudo's upbringing. Let me expand a little more on Chrisman's connection to Kennedy. It was on October 31st, 1968, when a grand jury in New Orleans issued a subpoena for Fred Lee Chrisman in connection to the assassination of JFK. This is the press release writing by District Attorney Jim Garrison. Quote, Mr. Chrisman has been engaged in undercover activity for a part of the industrial warfare complex for years. His cover is that of a preacher and a person engaged in work to help gypsies. Our information indicates that since the early 1960s, he has made many trips to New Orleans and Dallas areas in connection with his undercover work for that part of the warfare industry, engaged in manufacture of what is termed in military language a hardware, meaning those weapons sold to the U.S. government which are uniquely large and expensive. Mr. Chrisman is a former employee of the Boeing Aircraft Company in the in the sense that one defendant in the case is a former employee of Lockheed Aircraft Company in Los Angeles. In intelligence terminology, this ordinarily means that connections still exist, but that the former employee has moved into underground operation. More often than not, a bad record or evidence indicating that he has been fired is prepared for the parent company to increase the disassociation between the two, unquote. Kind of complicated there, but yeah. Chrisman was deposed in the case against Clay Shaw, the ex-CIA businessman. Conspiracy theories believe that Chrisman was one of the 3 tramps of homeless people that were arrested by Dallas police, the other 2 already covered being E. Howard Hunt and Frank Sturgis. Quote again, in 1979, the House Select Committee on Assassinations reported that forensic anthropologists had analyzed and compared the photographs of the 3 tramps with those of Chrisman, as well as with photographs of Watergate figures, E. Howard Hunt, Frank Sturgis, and 2 other men. According to the committee, only Chrisman resembled any of the tramps. But the same committee determined that he was not in Dealey Plaza on that day of the assassination. So, unquote. Chrisman died of kidney failure on December 10th, 1975. What do you think?
I don't know what to think. Were they the hobos or?
I think so, yeah.
Huh. Man. Okay.
Now, let's get into a few of the mysterious deaths that surround the octopus. Okay, there's a lot of that, actually. First up is Alan Standorf. I mentioned Standorf in the last episode in the Riku Nishudo segment, and I said, now I'm quoting myself again, a contact of his by the name of Alan Standorf said he worked at a secret military electronics listening post in Virginia and managed to supply Castellera with classified information regarding the Inslaw case. Many stipulate that those papers were among what went missing from his hotel room when he died.
Oh, when Castellera was murdered or suicided.
So, yeah, or whatever.
His papers were missing. That's right.
Mm-hmm. Huh. Standorf definitely had intelligence training through the military in Germany before the classified position of Vint Hill Farm, a military security installation near Manassas, Virginia. Apparently, he had quite the job shortly before his death and probably around the time he got into contact with Danny Castellero. Quote, Standorf supplied Castellero with classified information, and in order to quickly return the materials to avoid detection, Castellero set up high-speed commercial duplicating and collating equipment in room 900 at the nearby Hilton Hotel. Unquote. On January 31st, 1991, 7 months before Castellera is to be found dead, Alan Standorf's body was found on the back floor of his car at the Washington National Airport. He had been murdered by a blow to the back of the head. Possibly, he was meeting someone at the airport clandestinely, but we don't know. Dr. Stephen Sheehy, I don't know, of the Medical Examiner's Office in Northern Virginia said that Standorf's body had no visible wounds and was found under clothing and luggage in the back of his car. Journalists from 2018 to 2021 have sent Freedom of Information Act requests to Martinsburg Police Department about Alan Standorf, but received no answer. Up to this day. A little background of this for this next death. According to Ari Ben Menashe, the U.S. developed this backdoor to the Promise software with the help of Cabazon/Wackenhut. U.S. and Israel began looking for a neutral company that they could use to sell the software to other intelligence services. The company they chose was called Dagem Systems, a computer firm with offices in Guatemala, South Africa, and Israel. Publishing mogul Robert Maxwell had taken over Dagem for the purpose of selling Promise. Sold to a military regime in Guatemala, for example, quote, even if they travel under a false name, various characteristics such as height, hair color, age were fed into roadside terminals and Promise searched through its database looking for a common denominator. It would be able to tell an army commander that a certain dissident who was in the north 3 days before had caught a train, then a bus, stayed at a friend's house, and was now on the road under a different name. That's how frightening the system was, unquote.
Damn.
Mm-hmm. Officially, Maxwell's death was ruled as suicide or accidental since he was found floating in the ocean near his yacht. This was off the Canary Islands on November 5th, 1991. Spanish authorities concluded that he died of a heart attack, despite the fact that Maxwell had no history of heart disease. Later on, forensic specialists who worked on the body found that a perforation under Maxwell's left ear could have caused by an injection of a lethal substance. But who knows? Who knows, right? There were several speculations as to why anyone wanted him dead, such as money troubles, business enemies, and inheritance issues. In reaction to the octopus, it is said that his usefulness of selling promise was done, and he officially became a loose end. This next series of hits broke in the San Francisco Chronicle on December 30th, 1991, titled Bizarre Murders, Puzzle Cops. This is a connection to the murder of Fred Alvarez in 1981.
Going all the way back.
Yeah, the OG case that began this series. 6 months after Alvarez was killed, and let's not forget Boger and Castro, police found the body of Paul Morasca. He was hogtied by a telephone cord noosed around his neck and had strangled slowly as his legs uncurled. Morasca's body was found in his condo in San Francisco's Telegraph Hill. 3 days after that, a 63-year-old woman named Mary Quick, head of the Women's Auxiliary of American Legion, Post 509 in Fresno, was killed by a shot to the head as she approached the Legion Hall. Investigators at the time believed that these three murders were connected. Here's their connections. Morasca was an associate of Michael Riconosciuto and worked with other confidants in the Cabazon Arms project. He reported that he had the access codes for offshore accounts containing millions of dollars in drug money for covert operations. Mary Quick's death was seen as a mugging, but a year after her murder, police learned that Riconosciuto claimed a business connection with Quick's nephew, Brian Weiss. Quote, police sources told the San Francisco Examiner that Weiss gave his aunt a bank card with secret account numbers, perhaps the same access codes that may have led Paul Morasca's murder. According to the police, she had no connection to any of the principals and could be trusted. Mary Quick was to be instructed to give information only to Paul Morasca or Michael Riconosciuto. She was not aware of what the computer card was for and had never received the card. Unquote within the quote. Riconosciuto claimed that Mary Quick's murder was probably trying to recover the card. Unquote. Unquote there. So those are two deaths connected to Alvarez. Right. Well, Alvarez and Riconosciuto.
Right.
Yeah. These associations to Riconosciuto turning up dead give credibility to his wild allegations a little bit.
Yeah, it does.
A little more than a little bit, actually. There are more deaths connected to him. An attorney named Dennis Eisman was in contact with Danny Casolaro and was planning on heading to Tacoma, Washington to defend Riconosciuto when in April 1991 was shot and killed in his car in Philadelphia. Eisman had plans on visiting a woman about threats to his client. Quote, over time, Michael Riconosciuto lost 3 lawyers and an investigator under what could be construed as mysterious circumstances. In February 1987, Larry Guerin, a private investigator conducting Inslug-connected work for Riconosciuto, was killed in Mason County, Washington. After Eisman's death in April 1993, another attorney who worked with Riconosciuto, John Crawford, died suddenly from a heart attack in Tacoma. The decomposed body of a third Riconosciuto lawyer, Paul Wilcher, was found in Wilcher's Washington, D.C. apartment on June 23rd, 1993. Wilcher had been Gunther Rusbacher, who claimed to have videotape proof of and 16 witnesses to his having flown George W.H. Bush to one of the October surprise meetings. Unquote. Paul Wilcher, I've mentioned on this show before, is a very interesting figure in this series of conspiracies, as well as others, but I can't get into them today or ever. And there's no part 4. Don't get excited.
Part 4.
There's no get excited. I'm just not getting into them. Other mysterious deaths include Alan Michael May, who died in his home in San Francisco on June 1991. He was a former Nixon campaign aide who Riconosciuto mentioned 4 days earlier in an interview about May's involvement in the October surprise. The coroner at first reported May's death to be from a heart attack, but an autopsy revealed the presence of polypharmaceuticals in his body. Then there's Anson Eng, who was a reporter for the Financial Times in London. He was doing a story on the Wackenhut security guard, Jimmy Hughes, in the first episode, and followed him to South America, trying to get an interview. Quote, while in Guatemala during July 1991, Eng was murdered by a single bullet to the chest. His death was ruled as suicide. The Guatemalan government was asked to retrieve Eng's floppy disks and personal papers regarding his investigation. It did so and turned them over to the U.S. intelligence agency. In a press conference a few weeks later, Senator Alan Cranston requested that these items be returned, but they never were, unquote. Then there's Jonathan Moyle. On March 31st, 1990, Moyle's body was found hanging from a closet rail in his hotel room in Santiago, Chile. Moyle was a British journalist who was researching some of the same people Danny Casolaro was doing, but from a different angle. Both deaths were ruled as suicides, and both of their families did not believe that to be the case. The specific connection both Moyle and Casolaro had that involved Chile was an arms broker that lived there. Casolaro was looking into selling of the Promise software to an Iraqi intelligence officer, and Moyle, who was the editor of Defense Helicopter World, was looking into weapon sales to Iraq by that same broker. On the surface, it was concluded by several people and articles that both men didn't have enough evidence worth killing for, to which I say, they obviously did.
Wow, yeah.
Here's a few quotes. A few others. Quote, later, others would begin to develop lists of significant deaths related to the install case in much the same way many began making connections between the deaths of witnesses and others associated to the JFK assassination 25 years earlier. In addition to the reconnaissance lawyers, the list included Valley Delahanty, whose knowledge of a DA plan to set up Rick Nasciuto on a drug charge would have made her an important witness for him.
Yeah.
She disappeared on August 18th, 1992, but her body was not discovered until the following April in a ravine near Lake Bay, Washington. Another Rick Nasciuto ally, Pete Sandringen, who was working to help Rick Nasciuto defend himself from the drug charges, died the following December, an ammo clip from the gun he carried mysteriously missing. Barry Kuznick, a computer engineer who had worked on Promise enhancements, also made the list. According to one report, Kuznick's enhancement was called Brainstorm, an artificially intelligent program that applied the prognosticating ability of Promise to individual thought patterns. It ostensibly allowed Promise to deduce from personality characteristics the potential action of the person being traced.
Wow.
As in the install case, Kuznick apparently has made the modifications under a government contract that the government failed to pay, attempting to drive Kuznick into bankruptcy. Sound familiar?
Yes, it does.
Kuznick had previously done communications and intelligence work for Northrop Corporation and the U.S. military. His body had not been found, and 9 months after he was reported missing, family members were unable to get known business partners to acknowledge even knowing him. 5 boxes of his belongings were found in a lockup facility. Not found. Body no found. Most interesting of all the mysterious deaths connected to Inslaw, however, was that of 1960s political activist Abby Hoffman. Hoffman wrote an early piece on the October surprise for Playboy magazine, and shortly thereafter was involved in a suspicious automobile accident. Most regarded his death on April 12, 1989 as the suicide it was reported, as caused perhaps and due to depression. He suffered from the continued pain resulting from that accident. Others, however, suspected foul play in Hoffman's death, notably David Dellinger, a fellow member of the Chicago 8. Dellinger's suspicions even led him to attempt to retrieve the coroner's report for examination, but he was stopped by a threatened court battle. They, quote within the quote, they basically would not allow that to go to court, Dellinger concluded. But Abby's son Andrew and Abby's first wife Sheila are convinced he was killed, unquote. There's more, a lot more, but I'll stop there. You know Abby Hoffman, right? Do you know the whole thing? Chicago 7? The trial of the Chicago 7?
Yeah,
You see that movie?
I have not.
That's what he was famous for. Well, the big famous thing. Yeah.
I know the case. I don't know the intricacies of the case. How about that?
All good. All right. Now that ends that segment, essentially.
A
Now
lot of death. Holy shit.
a lot of death. That really is a lot more. This last segment is called The Octopus Never Ends. In conclusion to this massive series, how the fuck do I end it? There are so many loose ends that I haven't tied. Some of them I can't because the evidence or chatter isn't there, but mostly I didn't have time for them. Part of my original bullet points to research and write about were the Lebanese drug connections to the octopus, Lester K. Coleman's affidavit, which I mentioned, William Bradford Reynolds, and Robert Booth Nichols. Nichols I've talked about here and there, but his role is much bigger. He, not unlike Rikunoshuto, was a small member of the octopus and had spoken with Casolaro several times as a source of information. Funny enough, I don't think Nichols and Rikunoshuto liked each other because I found that each warned Danny Casolaro about the other, saying he's dangerous and not to trust his information too much. I cut Robert Booth Nichols out because of time and length, but that brings up something I should address regarding the octopus. I will be dipping my sanity back into this well in the future. Robert Booth Nichols is a perfect subject to tackle later on. Another very interesting figure is Paul Wiltshire, who talked about a shadow government pulling strings and other things before he was killed. He's definitely a revisit for me. Remember, the reason the murders of Fred Alvarez and Danny Casolaro were the first focus was because of how much spotlight they had. Truthfully, there's dozens of Alvarez's and Casolaros, but it is their deaths that brought many of the investigations, theories, and reporting. Casolaro wasn't the first to suggest that there's this group of nefarious people working within the halls of our government and in other countries for their own means and power gathering, only that it is when people started paying attention. Then there's an ex-FBI man named Ted Gunderson, who became a conspiracy theorist, private detective, and was a source for Cherry Seymour. He has a different angle on this octopus thing, but it might be juicy enough for a standalone episode in the future. With that, there are a few loose ends I'd rather tie up before ending the show. First, there's a book called Dark Victory, Ronald Reagan, MCA, and the Mob by Dan E. Moldea. It came out in 1986, and it is the first time in publication that the octopus was mentioned, and is a good chance that Casolaro borrowed the idea from Moldea. Next is some of Rikunoshuto's wild allegations that connects to segments in this series, as well as name drops another influential historical figure. Oh yeah, this is crazy. Quote, Rikunoshuto made the dramatic allegation that William Casey, outside counsel to Wackenhut prior to his work in the Reagan administration, had hired him and Bryan in 1980 to facilitate the now infamous October surprise, in which the Reagan administration allegedly paid the Iranians not to release American hostages until after his election. Rikunoshuto claimed that he and Bryan paid the Iranians $40 million in bribes. The promised software, so Rikunoshuto said, was Bryan's payment for his participation. Rikunoshuto also claimed that he had been instrumental in exposing the Nugan Handbank scandal, that he had met the Jackal, the famed international terrorist, and that he had made a tape recording of a clandestine meeting with William Casey that he was holding as an insurance policy on his life. Unquote.
Whoa.
Right?
The Jackal. I have, and that would be a fun one to cover.
Right? That would be a fun one. Right. So there's that. He says that, and I don't know if it's true. That's all I got on that. It makes some sense that Rikunoshuto's allies were dropping like flies while he stayed alive in a Tacoma jail cell. I couldn't find much on the Jackal connection, which is why I didn't mention it until the end as a fun way of illustrating that everything is connected. Which reminds me, quote, a 1999 book by the British journalist Gordon Thomas titled Gideon Spies, The Secret History of the Mossad, repeated the claims of Ari Ben-Menashe that Israeli intelligence created and marketed a Trojan horse version of Promise in order to spy on intelligence agencies in other countries. In 2001, the Washington Times and Fox News each quoted federal law enforcement officials familiar with debriefing former FBI agent Robert Hansen as claiming that the convicted spy had stolen copies of a promised derivative for his Soviet KGB handlers. Later reports and studies of Hansen's activities have not repeated these claims. Unquote. Hansen is a personal touch for me. In high school, I read a book called The Spy Next Door, The Extraordinary Secret Life of Robert Philip Hansen, the most damaging FBI agent in U.S. history, which is fascinating and makes sense in hindsight that he'd get hold of Promise software to give to his KGB handlers. Have you heard of this guy?
I don't think so.
Yeah, it's fine. It made news and when the book came out, for sure, early 2000s. And I read it in high school. It was a perfect time. And they made a movie called Breach. If you've ever seen Breach.
I haven't, but I'm going to have to check it out.
It has Chris Cooper, I want to say, and Ryan Phillippe.
Okay.
Phillippe. Anyway. Lastly is what the Octopus called themselves. Most sources claim that they were called themselves simply the company or the enterprise. You must understand that there were no business cards or letterheads. This is a shadowy group of people that worked on word of mouth and associations. You know that to break into Hollywood, you got to know someone that works in it, right? The same applies to the company, who will probably say that they didn't have a name for themselves. They just did what they wanted. It's who you know that matters. But also, just like Hollywood, if you're talented enough or make a big enough splash and are dirty enough, you may get invited in. Right? I ascribe to the theory that this group of people came about organically and help each other out through mutual understanding and in favors. I don't believe that they meet once a decade in some big evil conference. It's small conferences. A few would meet in Bohemian Grove, for example, while others meet in a board meeting from a shady organization like BCCI or something else. A James Bond villain would amass power to try to take over the world in some flashy manner, but what the Octopus is doing is a more subtle version of it. They already control the world, or as much as they want, but don't care about showing off. In fact, showing off will get you killed. I tried my best piecing this thing together into something cohesive. In one way, this 3-part series is my magnum opus, and in another way, it is a ball of nonsense with frayed, loose wires sticking out. I've decided to go with a quote to end this series, which puts things in Danny Casalero's perspective about the Octopus and recaps a little of the central figures. Quote, Danny Casalero believed the Octopus responsible for criminal conspiracies which formed a virtual history of intelligence double-dealing from 1950 to the present. These events, in Casalero's view, included the ousters of U.S. President Richard Nixon, Australian Prime Minister Gough Whitlam, the Shah of Iran, and the murders of Chilean President Allende, and of course, President John F. Kennedy. Casalero saw the Octopus's tentacles entwined throughout the creation of the Golden Triangle and Latin American drug trade, the Cuban Bay of Pigs debacle, the October Surprise, the BCCI banking scandal, and almost as an afterthought, the theft of Promise software. Casalero found a secret team, a high cabal of players operating a clandestine, parallel government identified previously by other writers. The cabal had operated beyond the control or scrutiny of the elected government, financed by drug running from Southeast Asia and the Americas. Other researchers tended to see the Octopus as a fog of political crimes ascribed to the alphabet soup of intelligence agencies, institutions, or even the natural dialectic of the modern terrorist state and its citizenry. Casalero's Octopus, however, was no grand, unified mega conspiracy theory. Casalero believed the crimes could best be identified by linking them to a small network of named individuals that made up his Octopus. He outlined their hierarchy and provided specific detail about their behind-the-scenes roles in contemporary political history. Casolaro named the people both familiar and unfamiliar to other researchers. He deemed the first level operatives to be Richard Helms, George Pender, John Philip Nichols, and Ray Klein. The second level included Robert Chasen, E. Howard Hunt, Edwin Wilson, Thomas Kleins, and Ted Shackley. Working backwards from the promised theft, Casolaro saw them a new relationship, a nearly organic entity that impacted on both past and then current events. Unquote.
I don't even know what to say, man.
Right.
It's so involved. It's stupefying how involved this thing is. How many players, how many world events, the finances, the murders, the software. It's literally unbelievable.
Yeah, it's insane. And the thing is that too much of it is true. And there's so much that is true that isn't proven. It's just so obvious that it makes you wonder the things that sound crazier, are they also true because we can't prove it, just like this other stuff that seem more obvious? I don't know, like where does the line go? And that's where people like get lost in it, as to how much of it to take in. But I think it's much easier in this case because so much of it is true. Like I said, even half is already too much. Even half from one of them is too much. Like it says so much more about their brazenly actions, that they just do whatever they want, get away with it. I think that even if half of it's true, we should assume that 90% of it is true, and then work our way backwards to disproving them. I don't think it should be, in a sense, to prove it guilty. I think these guys probably should get the reversal of that, where like they're probably guilty until they're proven innocent. They should probably do that way. Now, the unfortunate thing, since this thing started in 1950s with the sacred cows of those old bastards that got all their glory from World War II. Let's face it, they're all mostly dead.
Yeah.
Because age is a bitch, and we're all affected by that until they develop something. So we can only affect the ones that are still alive or still working. And I'm not saying there is none of those. There's definitely some of those, but it's like Gen 3 of that, right? So just third generation of that. So like, I don't know what they look like. I don't know what they're doing. The great thing about this conspiracy is that the hindsight of it is what works. It's because so many people have already died and have already come out. So many documents have been unearthed and unsealed since the 70s, 60s, 50s, whatever, that we get to reap the rewards now. Now we can piece things together more. Right now I can say this and say that with more vindication. If this was 1981, I couldn't say anything about most of this stuff because it wasn't known.
Right.
Or, and then it sucks. Like how much stuff will 30 years from now reveal about stuff that's been happening this decade? I have no idea. If assuming it's still going and assuming they're still as brazen. I mean, we've seen a lot of examples and a lot of other things, but do any of them connect to the octopus? Or are they dead? Did they just die off and that's it? And there's just nothing anymore? Yeah. I don't know. It's hard. It's hard. I don't know.
Very fun. Very hard. You're right. But so incredibly interesting. And what a level of research you put into these 3 episodes, man. Thank you.
Yeah. And this all started with a TikTok.
From a TikTok, right? That's right.
Yep. Mm-hmm. I'm never going on TikTok again. That's basically what I'm saying.
And I don't know. I think with that, Oscar, take us home.
Mm-hmm.